Hey guys, welcome to part 3 of the team video walkthrough. Today we're covering the training trip segment that goes to Ellie Goulding's Burn. This was actually an interesting one to try and start thinking about because, as I've already mentioned before, I wanted the majority of the transitions to take place in West Gym. How do I get from West Gym to Florida all of a sudden? It seemed like an odd dichotomy to try and combine the two. Whatever my transition was, I had to make sure I got it during training trip, and I knew that going in. So I got a bunch of different random shots about stuff that I could possibly use. One of the shots I really liked the idea of using for the transition was a shot of me coming out of the water during the Kalamazoo meet. What's interesting about that shot is I didn't know what it looked like until the final day of training trip. So to a certain extent, I was kind of playing it by ear, and I knew that whatever I had gotten, I was going to have to use regardless. It turned out to be a really great shot. The exposure level and everything else almost seems to fade and just soften a little bit. I really liked how that effect seemed to soothe and relax after the explosion of energy we've had over the last two segments. It really seemed like the video was about to say, okay, let's calm down, take a breath, and then continue. How do I get into a point where I can use that shot of me coming out of the water? I can't just start out in the water in Florida. That's kind of weird. I was actually tapering for conference during one practice, and I realized I still have to get that shot so I can start editing it. I ended up taking my GoPro to a taper practice. After practice was over, I think it was one of those where we could stay around and dive if we wanted to kind of thing. So I jumped in, and I had several moments where I was just trying to get something where I could pause, look at the lane lines to tell you're in West Gym, and then move up. Moving up means I have to blow air out of my nose. It hurts sometimes because I wasn't prepared for putting my head like that and waiting long enough before I started coming out of the water. There were a few shots I did where there were no bubbles whatsoever because I wanted to try and originally do it with a crystal clear water surface. And I realized after enough takes that that wasn't going to happen. I ended up using a shot where I did use a lot of bubbles to try and keep my breath and all that kind of stuff under the water. And I did move the camera physically upward, but what I did to mask the transition was I used a zoom effect to try and blend the two together to make it look like all of a sudden you're rushing up out of the water into something else. That's why the transition is as smooth as it is, because of a bit of a fade between the two of them. I tried using a hard cut and it didn't work very well. Anyway, so now that we're in this new segment, I was thinking, well, gee, we were just underwater and I've been looking for an excuse to use underwater shots. So what better way to do this than just use some of the shots that I got from the Kalamazoo meet? I wasn't going to be using a lot of swimming in this segment anyway, so might as well make it interesting. It should be important to notice here that I actually cropped the song from the original first verse, which sounds something like this.
We don't have to worry about nothing.
I thought that was way too soft to start out, and though I wanted the segment to be a little bit more of a breather, I still wanted to maintain some energy from the last segment. So I actually cut out the first opening soft part and just moved the back half up a little bit. This is one of those parts of the videos that I ended up considering retroactive editing. In other words, for the last few segments, I was always planning my steps out ahead of time before I would start editing. With this one, it was more like I wanted to let the song speak to me as I was editing it, so I just throw down footage in specific segments and see what worked. For this one, since I was already starting out in a specific pool, I wanted to keep that pool area going, realizing throughout the entire thing that I was going to have to move quickly from one place to another. So I wanted everything in this one segment to take place in the one pool. So all the shots that you see over the next 30 seconds or whatever come from that specific pool. I tried to time the appearance of people on deck with downbeats, that kind of thing. Until finally we get to a shot of Aaron Schwab. Now I was looking for an excuse to use a shot of Aaron Schwab in this song, specifically because it is entitled Burn. I got a shot of him talking about his sunburn. So I'll show you that right now.
Sunburn. It's not a sunburn. Okay, fine. It's tan.
So what I did with that is I ended up taking the shot and cropping around when he said burn, and then putting that on repeat a few times just to mimic the song. And then I'd freeze frame it and start going back into pictures. So now I was kind of thinking, okay, so we've been at this pool for a little bit. We've got a lot of places left to go to on Florida because we've got a bunch of stuff to cover. Where do we go next? Okay, so how do you transition from one place to the other? You just don't go straight from picture to picture. And I was thinking, I usually got some shots of some moving imagery as we were going from place to place. So I decided to use that going from the pool that we were just at. All of a sudden we were going to the Everglades. It wasn't necessarily totally clear at that specific point, but that was like the next specific segment that I wanted to go to kind of thing. And that was mostly because there's a part where it feels like there's a hiccup in what Ellie Goulding is actually doing. I'll play that right here. And I was kind of like, what if I changed from driver to driver at that specific point? From who I was with going to the pool to who I was with going to the Everglades. I happened to be in Christian's car, so I ended up switching from Andy to Christian. And I know Christian ended up saying something afterward to the extent that, what are you trying to compare me to Andy or something? And no, I just want to clear that up right now. So I just want to go into the record and apologize. Andy, I'm sorry for comparing you with Christian. It's a terrible thing to do. I'm sorry, I should not have done it. It just so happened that I had footage of both of those two as drivers. The next segment was obviously the Everglades. It started out by showing the sign there to get you ready that, oh, this is just the Everglades segment. This is something we're going to be doing. And there were a lot of good shots in this one that I actually enjoyed. One of the most disappointing things about going to the Everglades was not really seeing an alligator or a crocodile. I know some people did, and it was really frustrating that I didn't get the crocodile on camera. So what I ended up doing to make up for that, I ended up putting the fake one in there instead. Though I didn't ended up putting the pictures of people with the alligator, I made sure to put the most interesting animals that we saw in there. It seemed like everybody was all over a turtle, but there was a bird that really tried to mark its territory by flapping its wings really quickly that a lot of us reacted pretty funnily to, like this.
Oh my gosh, okay.
There were a lot of good moments that I really wish I was able to elaborate on, but I had to move quickly from one to the other. So the next segment that I wanted to attack was going to the beach. Okay, so now how do I get from the Everglades to the beach? I then used the same idea that I did before where it was like moving imagery or whatever, but I graphic matched that with going down the line of people looking out at the Everglades, because I wanted to keep that idea of motion going. You'll notice that as the song tends to pick up some rhythm or whatever, as it starts to get faster, the bird's wings start to flap really quickly, and then all of a sudden you go from that to movement down the line. One of my favorite shots of that trip is always looking up at the sun directly with the camera. I tend to get that on every training trip just so I can use it later, and it happened to work in this situation where I would flood the camera with light, use a bloom transition which almost looks like a camera flash effect where it just kind of slowly glows and then explodes with light, and then all of a sudden you're at the beach. So once again I went through a bunch of pictures from that, and one of the main things I wanted to get was shots of people drinking out of coconuts. So I ended up putting 3 at once in the same shot, and I ended up incorporating it with the transition itself. The transition I was going to time specifically with the beats of the music. It always happens in 3s, so I made sure to make sure it was 3 parts. And then the next segment that came up was people with the GoPro out in the water itself with a great group shot, and I wanted to make sure that exploded toward the screen. The problem with that was that the song didn't allow for that. The actual song actually keeps going at its steady pace at that point. So I actually took the musical transition from later on in the song and put that earlier in the song, so I was able to use that transition. And then after that, the song really feels like it's about to take off, so I was literally sitting there going like, Will Sparks got a bunch of people diving off the side of the pool for one of the drills that we did, so why not use that footage in this situation? So I just used a bunch of different shots of people cutting specifically on the beat. We are in that pool now. We have now successfully transitioned from one place to the other. What better way to keep going with that theme, going from the dive to the lane lines? It was a great way to get a bunch more group shots in there of people just hanging out, and then obviously ending with the total group shot in the middle of the pool. So then I was kind of thinking, okay, so you're going from that to literally one of the calmest moments in the entire song. To me, the calmest moment should be something involving relaxation. And one of the most relaxing things that I saw was going out scuba diving. And what better way to transition from that than use a water droplet effect to going underwater. And once again, I tried to use the rule of 3s as far as matching the beats and bringing new pictures in. Honestly, that provided the best excuse possible to end up using the progression of Camille falling down on her butt on the boat. And what I ended up doing with those was I would flash each picture in, literally light it up. So this segment was all about relaxation. I just moved from that to a bunch of different funny shots kind of thing. And then all of a sudden when the music picked back up, I would go specifically to the team dinner. And I used that same theme of flashing in pictures, like they're actually taking pictures of the people. I thought that was a really cool effect. It was a mixture of creating that camera flash effect and mimicking the theme of the song itself. And then I knew that I wanted to end with the moonshot flashing back out again. I had already thought about using that transition while I was in Florida. That's the reason why I got that shot. That shot actually had Wilson and Brady dancing in the foreground of it. I have to put that in. I'm going to time it to the music as best as possible just to create something funny. And as y'all know by this point, I always tend to end with the donut segment. I usually feel like that's the funniest part of the training trip, so that's usually what I put toward the end. Made sure to put Silas in there because he was one of those struggling. And as usual, I tend to put the top 4 finishes in the video itself. Remember, top 4 finishes make it into the video. I had to make sure to put Benito with his Dunkin' Donuts hat on there because that's something that we might never see accomplished again. And then finally, since the song was ending, I just went to all of the class years on the pirate ship. It's like, this is the time coming to an end, so this is our lasting shot of training trip. So if you'll notice specifically as I fade from that shot to the blocks, there's a bit of a waver in that. And that was to mimic Ellie Goulding's voice, which warbles and vibrates a little bit toward the end of the song, for whatever reason. And I thought that was a really cool way of, again, combining visual to audio. And so I ended the segment in a similar way that I've been doing the entire time. So now, as we started out in Florida, we're gonna still end with the closing shot of Florida, the shot of the blocks looking toward the sunlight. And the funniest thing about that, to me, was the fact that I included the sunlight in there. That was probably the worst part about training at that pool, was looking directly at the sunlight. The sun's effect on the camera was absolutely gorgeous, and I knew as soon as I took that shot, I was like, this is beautiful. I have to use this. And that represented Florida as a whole. Also, many thanks to Josh for letting me use his GoPro. That really helped out since I didn't have access to one otherwise. So thank you, Josh, for letting me use that. That was really helpful. So yeah, that was part 3 of the team video. Join us next time as we go back to Carlton and have some fun with the blooper reel. Alright guys, thanks for watching.